بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم انشر علينا رحمتك وأنزل علينا حكمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. We just recited from the middle portion of Surah Maryam, I think the 18th surah of the Qur'an, maybe 17, of the Surah Maryam, in which we recited the last portion about Maryam coming out with the baby and the miracle of the baby speaking. And then in the second rak'ah, we talked about the conversation between Ibrahim and his father Azar. One thing that's still pending is that where he says, قَالَ سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكَ سَأَسْتَغْفِرُ لَكَ رَبِّي, I will ask God for forgiveness for you. إِنَّ رَبِّي كَانَ حَفِيًّا وَأَعْتَزِلُكُمْ وَمَا تَدْعُونَ. And then he distanced himself from his actions. So that is still pending. But we've spoken about the conversation. We did not talk about that last part. So I'm just footnote here that we're going to come full circle in that story, but we didn't get to it yet. The part of the story that we're at is I'm going to get to in just a moment, which is when he and his wife Sarah or Sarah, both are possible pronunciations. Sarah in Arabic meaning the one that is cheerful and joyful, and Sarah being the one who brings joy to others, right? And then Sarah in the Hebrew language meaning beautiful. So all of them are fine, right? Because these are all coming from a common root, the Hebrew and the Arabic languages. So they're all similar, right? Depending on which permutation of it you go for. But before we go, since we have a very short assignment today, I want to do a little bit of review, right? And the reason for that is because last week we delved into the core and the essence of what it means to be Muslim. I mean, out of all of the halaqas that we've done, all of the lessons that we've done, I think last week was the most important one, really. It's not hyperbole, because we tackled the essence of Iman, right? What is the core and the kernel of having certainty in faith? So I cannot think of a subject which is more essential to Tawheed, to the oneness of belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and more important than when we spoke about last time. We talked about trust in Allah, right? When they threw him into the fire. We talked about the intelligence that وَتِلْكَ حُجَّةٌ, and this is the proof and the evidence that we gave Ibrahim ala qawmihi in order to debate and to articulate proofs and evidence and reason before his people. So we talked about the place for logic and reason, right? That this is one of the sources and the ways that Allah guides people. We talked about the nature of faith. Is it something that is mawhuba? Is it something that is divinely gifted? Or is it muktasaba? Is it something that is attained? Is it something that is earned? We discussed that. We talked about the sources of revelation, the sources of faith. Is it revelation? Is it reason? Is it nature? Is it observation? And as I mentioned, these are all three are sources of faith and guidance. But of course, revelation is the most direct source out of the three. And we concluded our discussion with a conversation about al-yaqeen, about certainty. And we talked about a little bit about Ibrahim and his conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So as you know, the first stage of certainty is something that is theoretical. So it is a strength of faith that you have in your heart based on the proofs from your Lord. That is ilm al-yaqeen, the knowledge of certainty. But then there's a kind of witnessing that happens at the second stage. And what is that called? That is the eye of certainty, ayn al-yaqeen in Arabic. The eye of certainty, because it's like, a picture is like 1,000 words, right? So once you witness it yourself, then now that is a higher level of certainty. وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. Now it's like, okay, now I understand how it works. And then after that, inshallah, we'll all experience that, if not in this world, in the afterlife, then you have absolute certainty. That is the truth and the reality of certainty, and that is haqq al-yaqeen. Okay, mashallah, you guys were paying attention. That's good. So these are the three stages. And whether you know the Arabic words or not, that's not important. But to understand the nature of certainty is very, very important. And we mentioned Al-Junayd al-Baghdadi's statement, which I think is so profound, we should repeat it again. He said that yaqeen, certainty, is the internalization, right? So you can believe something, you can write it in your notes, but the istiqrar is when you have completely imbibed that. When there's an internalization of knowledge that will not turn, that will not change, and that will not waver in the heart. Now, in the more simplistic language, when we think about wavering and changing, is there a dua from the Prophet ﷺ in which he says, "O changer of the hearts," what does he say? He said, "Make my heart," that's right, "make my heart firm. Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi." Nas'alullah al-thabat. We ask Allah for thabat, for firmness. Say Ameen. Because that's very important, because you might wake up in the morning as a believer and you might depart this universe in a different state, and vice versa. Right? A person can do the actions of the people of Jannah their whole life, but because it has been written that they will be from the people of the hellfire, that person will choose out of their own volition to do an action from the people of the hellfire, and they will be written from the people of the hellfire. And these two things can coexist. Somebody would say, well, fate caught up with them. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, كَانَ اللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ alima. So Allah knows that the person is going to change. So the fact that they were doing the actions of the people of Jannah for their whole life is not going to change that reality, right? So that's why the Prophet ﷺ always asked to keep my heart firm. بِالْقَوْلِ الثَّابِتِ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. And what is the statement of thabat? That قَوْلِ الثَّابِت, what is that firm statement? That is, you know this, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So the essence of yaqeen, so when we talk about spirituality, spirituality is tawheed. There's no difference. The tawheed when people talk about the statement and the shahada, this is ilm al-yaqeen. And then the spirituality is about realizing it in your actions, in your suluk, in your behavior, and in your modes of thinking, in the ways that you emote, in the ways that you feel. So that is a higher level of tawheed. So if your spirituality is taking you away from Allah, then this is not spirituality. As Sidi Ahmad Zarruq, he wrote, the very famous Sufi writer from Morocco, from the very early period, in Qawaid al-Tasawwuf, he said there are 2,000 definitions for Sufism, Tasawwuf. And he said every single definition can be summarized as sincerity. He said any other definition of Tasawwuf is incorrect. So I agree with this, right? Because I think, then what's the point? Then what is it that you have to do this and step 5 times, then jump that way? No, what is this? This is not spirituality. This is not. Then you're saying that there's something the Prophet ﷺ missed or he didn't tell us about? Impossible. This is a great lie against the Messenger ﷺ. If you say that something is so hidden and so esoteric that nobody can get to it, then it's not possible. It has to be in the deen. It has to be in the Qur'an. It has to be in the Sunnah. Otherwise, you're making it up. So Ibn al-Qayyim, he says in Madarij al-Salikin, which is a very important book, and I mentioned the last time, I thought it so fascinating that he took that quote of Al-Junayd al-Baghdadi, because Al-Junayd al-Baghdadi is like one of the most famous early Sufi thinkers, and Ibn al-Qayyim is considered one of the most conservative, today we would say Salafi, but that word didn't exist at the time, thinkers. I love them both. He says that the truth of the matter is that certainty, yaqeen, is earned from the perspective of the means. So this question of certainty, is it earned or is it given, depends on the vantage point. So if you're looking so it's the same thing, right? So you guys are looking at this, you're seeing green ICCP. Am I seeing green ICCP on this? I'm not. I'm seeing my own name here, right? So we're looking at the same object, but if you describe it and if I describe it, we'll be talking about something different, right? Similarly, one person is facing the Kaaba and they have a Rukn al-Yamani, they have the Yemeni corner, another person has Al-Hajar al-Aswad, has the black stone, they're going to paint a different picture. But you're talking about the same thing. So al-Yaqeen is the same, but when you look from the perspective of the means, it's earned. You will not get yaqeen without the means. And in terms of logic, what do we say? Is it important? In logic, we don't use the word important. In the world of logic and philosophy, what do you say? Necessary, jazakallah. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient. It is necessary, but it is not sufficient, right? Because that causal link is incomplete without the input from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, Allah is in control of everything. He's musabbibul asbab. I talked about that in the Jum'ah khutbah. So it is necessary, but that is not adequate. If you look from the opposite vantage point, which is from the vantage point of its essence, and it's true as they call ontological reality. It's true, like in Arabic we would say that, what it's composed of, what it's made of, its ontological reality, then it is a pure gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means you don't guide yourself, right? And this is something, this is another beauty of Islam, that it doesn't matter which scholar you follow. When you start talking about matters of aqeedah, I know people debate about different, what does this ayah mean, what does that mean? But literally we're 99.9%, we're all saying the same thing, right? No matter who you listen to, they're going to say exactly the same thing I just said. Anywhere you go in the world, any country in the world, and you ask them about the nature of Iman, they will tell you the same thing that I just told you. Because we're not fighting about the basics of our religion. We're fighting about where to put the hands in the salah, how long the beard, we were fighting about other stuff, like how long does the beard have to be. You know how many people fight about whether the pants can go beyond the ankles? We don't have that in ICCP too much. Have you seen that? I've seen people like get almost ready to have like a fist fight, like, about this. I mean, if your pants are above your ankle, you're following the Prophet ﷺ. If it's beyond the ankle, then you're praying like Abu Bakr. So like, it's not possible that Abu Bakr, you know something that Abu Bakr didn't know, okay? Like, let's just cross that out. Everybody agree with me? We don't know something about Islam that Abu Bakr did not know, all right? So the Prophet ﷺ is like, no, that prohibition is not for you because you're not doing it out of arrogance. So people need to just kind of chill out a little bit and understand the reasoning that there's something behind everything in the religion. And then also there's some people that need to stop chilling out. They need to get serious, right? Because ad-deen, the religion is bayn al-ifrati wa-tafrit. Al-ifrati wa-tafrit. So one excess, one extremism in religion is tashaddud, is being extreme in that you overdo things. What is the opposite extremism? Is being so laid back and so chill about everything that you don't take it seriously. We consider this a form of extremism. This is a form of extremism. Because now you're like, well, does God really care whether I pray? I mean, I'm pretty sure He cares. I mean, He said, كَانَتْ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ كِتَابًا مَوْقُوتًا. I'm pretty sure, unless you know something, unless you've been chatting, with God and you know something I don't know, that's possible, but I'm pretty sure it's important. So this takes us to the honey analogy. Somebody remind me of the honey analogy. This was initially, it doesn't say it in the book, but I know it from Abu Hamid al-Ghazali first, and then I see Ibn al-Qayyim, he uses the same analogy. So I'm guessing he got it from Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, right? So what is ilm al-yaqeen when it pertains to honey? Help me out here. What is the knowledge of certainty? You know American marketing, right? We'll even sell milk. Right? We're like, have you guys seen the milk? I grew up with milk commercials. Milk mustache, Got Milk. Anybody know the Got Milk commercial? Is it only me? That's what we grew up with. And one day I was like, why are they advertising milk? It's milk. Why? Do we need marketing for milk? So when it comes to honey, even like you pick up a bottle of honey and it says what honey is. Isn't it? Did you ever think that's a little crazy? Like, can you imagine that in the Middle East? There's no way in the Middle East you pick up a bottle and it says like, this is honey, it comes from bees, right? From the pollen in the mountains, right? So what is ilm al-yaqeen when it comes to honey? It's you reading the label, right? Because this honey is delicious, it's from the wildflowers, it's from clover, right? It's from, it has a natural pollen, has propolis, whatever it is. So it's going to be written there, that's ilm al-yaqeen. Do you know whether that honey is good? No, but because we are excellent consumers, do we think the honey is good? We do because we believe it. So we're like, oh, this is awesome honey. You should try this. This manuka, it's like $50. It's got to be good, right? So we're like, have some. It's like 165 plus. You got to try it, right? But we may not have experienced it, but we're ready to recommend it. That's ilm al-yaqeen. Then when will our confidence level in the honey increase? Yes. So you're going to watch other people, right, eat the honey and they're going to be like, oh, this is amazing. This is awesome, right? And so that has elevated you from ilm al-yaqeen to ayn al-yaqeen because you've witnessed it. Then at the third level, what do you do with the honey? That is when you actually experience it. Now, Ibn al-Qayyim, he doesn't mention this because he's using the analogy in a different way. He's talking about certainty of God. But Imam al-Ghazali, in his book, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalala, it's actually Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, in his book, The Deliverance from Error, he says that what does the honey represent? Right? And this is common in the Sufi lexicon. What do they talk about? What type of knowledge? It's a type of experiential knowledge that you have to taste. They call this a dhawq. So it's not enough for you to experience. Somebody can be like, oh, well, when you do these adhkar, you're going to feel close to Allah. They're going to be like, no, that's all theoretical stuff. Just join us, right? That's what they're going to say. Just join us, be in the majlis of dhikr, and you will have dhawq. You'll experience it, you'll taste it, right? And this is another level because now they're talking about the matter of the heart. They're not really talking about the same thing. What we're not talking about that. But it's the same analogy. We're talking about being completely certain about your iman, about your faith. And Ibrahim, it seems on its face like he had a little bit of doubt because he says, "Arini kayfa tuhyil mauta." He says, "Show me how you grant life to the death." And what does Allah say back to him? Don't you believe? أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ? And look at how he responds. And also look at the adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is how we should navigate. When we have questions, when we have these small doubts, he says, Bala, I do indeed believe. وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. The reason I'm seeking this is because I want to affirm, I want to elevate my iman. I want to have that at-tuma'nina. I want to have that tranquility and security. He wanted to ascend from ilm al-yaqeen to ayn al-yaqeen. So we mentioned this last time but this time I want to go through it slowly. We mentioned it last time quickly. Imam al-Nawawi, and as you guys know Imam al-Nawawi, right? From Dr. Tariq, he gave his biography. Imam al-Nawawi is one of the most accepted Islamic scholars in the world. As you know, there are more than 200 hadith collections of 40 hadith. Did you know that? There are over 200. How many of them do you know? 99.9% of Muslims only know 140 hadith. That is the 40 al-Arba'in al-Nawawi. This is the only one we know. Because the Ummah has, and when you go to the commentary of Sahih Muslim, there's dozens and dozens of commentaries. But what commentary does the whole Muslim world gravitate to? We all read the same book, the Sharh of Sahih Muslim of Imam al-Nawawi. So for some reason, this world, and he was a great scholar of Sharia, and he was also on the spiritual path, the Sufi path himself. Imam al-Nawawi, in my view, is the best representations of a balanced person who exemplifies the knowledge in Sharia and also his commentary on the spiritual path. This is very important because we need that today. He says that these thoughts paradoxically show strong faith. Can you imagine that? Because sometimes we have people who are asking questions, they're questioning their iman. He says that the person's reactions to these involuntary thoughts, he calls them involuntary thoughts. Because sometimes, shaitan does some waswasa, you start questioning and asking questions. He says the fact that they're seeking out knowledge is indicative that they are protective of their iman. They're seeking to protect their faith and they want to ensure its security. He says the reason that they feel uncomfortable, the reason they feel that, oh, this is blasphemous, is because faith is present. And this is why in our Islamic law, when somebody makes a statement that contradicts the Sharia, we don't bring prosecutions with different blasphemy laws. We have them on the books, right? But there's so many requirements, you never get to them. Because you engage the person, you discuss the person, you bring more knowledgeable people to talk to them. So that way they come to resolve their doubts. If there was no iman in the case of the people who are questioning, there would not be any anxiety and certainly there would not be any dissonance. They would just come to their conclusion and be done with it. He quotes Qadi Iyad. You guys know Qadi Iyad. Who's Qadi Iyad? He's famous for, he's written many, many books, but he's famous because of one book, Ash-Shifa. This is the one that we're covering on Friday, which is one of the most beautiful, and people that criticize it, the truth is it is full of weak hadith. Like almost half of the hadith, maybe the majority of the hadith in that book are weak, right? And the author knows that, and he says it in the introduction, that I included a lot of weak hadith because the weak hadith are supporting each other. So they paint a full picture. But people, they do criticize the book because it relies on a lot of weak hadith. And you know me, I like to give you the whole story, right? So shaitan, he puts these whispers into the minds of people. Why? This is from the Talbis Iblis. And by the way, if you're interested, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, the same one, the student of Ibn Taymiyyah, he wrote another very, very excellent book called Talbis of Iblis. It's a wonderful book, strongly. I think it has been translated into English recently. It's very, very practical and very helpful. So he talks about the trickery of shaitan. So when shaitan, who does shaitan go to whisper them to create doubts? Only the people who he has completely given up on misguiding. Because if he could get you to do shirk, he would have done that. If he could get you to be an atheist, to disbelieve in Allah, ilhad, he would have done that. So instead, the fact that shaitan is whispering to you to create doubts out of frustration, that represents a deep failure on the part of shaitan to misguide someone. So coming full circle of our review from and conclusions from the last lesson is that if you experience a period of your life in which your iman is weak, or you feel disconnected, or you feel that you have doubts, rather than getting stuck in a negative space, you should follow the advice of Imam an-Nawawi and say that the reason that shaitan is going after me is because I am a strong believer. Because I have iman, this is why I'm experiencing this. And so this is my test. And then be able, when people are going through that period, we should not make them feel that their iman is suspect. Instead, we should surround them in an environment of affirmation, right? So for example, people in the end of, let's say somebody is going through a terminal disease. I mean, as an imam, I have spent so many hours in the hospital, I cannot even count, right? I mean, I've spent days and days in hospitals. But the average person doesn't spend a lot of time in hospitals. We spend a lot of time with people that are dying, so we're used to that. Or people that have terminal diseases. It's not only me, it's every imam on the planet, right? That's part of the job, that's what we do. And one of the things that you see is that people are really tested sometimes, because it's not just a physical test, it is a psychological test. Because they're thinking, why am I afflicted? Why am I going through this? It's not my time, right? And so sometimes people, when they see loved ones that are going through this, it causes them like a secondary kind of grief or distress. And so, what is our Islamic teaching? Do we start, obviously, we don't make them feel guilty about it. What is it that we do in that scenario? When we have a loved one that's going through that kind of crisis of faith, what should we do? We should be patient, but you surround that person with a positive environment, right? Surah Yasin is an essential part of that, right? We recite Surah Yasin after people have passed away, right? But if you investigate and you look in all the hadith about Surah Yasin, when do those hadith say to recite Yasin? I mentioned this when we did the tafsir. It's good that we recite it after a person. There's nothing wrong. It's not, according to a weak hadith, it is the heart of the Qur'an. And even though the hadith is weak, it is definitely the heart of the Qur'an. The meaning is correct. But we don't have hadith saying to read it after a person dies. The hadith says what? Read it. Read it at the end of the time of death or in the time leading up to death. Why? Because Surah Yasin gives you everything you need in terms of the nature of life and the nature of the afterlife. Right? So we surround them with an environment in which the Shahada Talqeen, in which the Shahada is being recited, in which the Qur'an is being recited, instead of trying to debate or to convince them. Right? Because debating actually causes people more doubt. And this is also a problem in social media, right? When you pop up, does anybody have the algorithm fighting them on, if you listen only to ICCP videos, this is not going to happen to you, right? But if you watch even one of those crazy, Muslim influencers, what happens with the algorithm? That's it. I don't know, the internet gods, whatever it is, this algorithm is like, that person is crazy. So once the algorithm decides you're crazy, they're going to send you this one and that video, and the world is flat, and vaccines are making you into robots. I don't know. You're going to get all of those videos because they're like, this person is a sucker. Right? So don't watch one of those videos. And then you'll keep watching those videos and it'll make you actually dumber. The algorithm, because the algorithm doesn't care about you learning, right? What does the algorithm care about? It cares about more ad revenue. So if they keep engagement and you keep clicking and especially one video ends and you watch the next one, so that's it, right? So this is the nature of yaqeen. Now we can jump into today's lesson, which is a short one, which is about using speech to advance virtue. Using speech rather than deception. So here you have Ibrahim, he's exiled with his wife Sarah, alayhim as-salam, and Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he stated that the mashhur opinion is that Sarah's father was the paternal uncle of Ibrahim, right? And this means that they are first cousins, alayhim as-salam. And this is important because in the Jewish and the Christian text, who is Sarah to Ibrahim? MashaAllah, you guys are good Muslims. You don't read, you don't know the Bible. That's okay. In the Bible, we don't have any Jewish people here. I don't want to offend them. They call it the Hebrew Bible, right? Which means but Christians call it the Old Testament, right? In the book of Genesis, it's mentioned that they are half siblings. They share a common mother. Now, as Muslims, this is objectionable because in the absence of any text in the Qur'an or otherwise, the idea that they are direct siblings, even if it's half siblings, right, is something which is very problematic. This is in the book of Genesis, chapter 20, verse 12. So he has the conversation with the king in Egypt, Abimelech, in Egypt, and Ibrahim, he reveals that Sarah, this is at the end of the story, is both his wife and half-sister. So these are later on, and it says in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Leviticus, later on this is banned and this is prohibited. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also mentions حُرِّمَ عَلَيْكُمْ, and He lists all of the relations that are what we know as mahram, right? So we know the mahram because of the dress code. But the essence of mahram is who you can't marry. Right? That's the most important thing. So they migrate from Al-Iraq and they move into Ash-Sham. They stop in Harran. What happens in Harran? We talked about this last week. What happens in Harran? Who does he meet in Harran? He meets a group of people, and they don't worship idols of stone, they don't worship idols of wood, they worship the moon. They worship the stars also, but the moon especially, right? And today it's in the border of Turkey, in the place of Urfa, right, which is right on the border with Syria. But then as they enter into Asham, they see that there's a very severe drought. So they leave and they split up. Lut goes to where? Lut goes towards into Palestine and Jordan, and he goes into the famous place of Sadum, right? So in English, Sodom, right? And that story is to be continued, dot, 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 right? And then Ibrahim and his wife Sarah, because remember there was the question last week about what about Hajar? Hajar didn't enter in the story yet, right? So right now it's Ibrahim and Sarah. So the two of them, they go to Egypt. But when they enter Egypt, as soon as they enter, they didn't know, because this is the great kingdom of Egypt. When we talk about ancient civilizations, right? Egypt is like one of the first ones. And there's so much in the history of Egypt. We talked about it when we mentioned about Idris. Remember I told you about the Sphinx, right? So ancient Egypt is in the picture from the very beginning. But when they enter, they find that Egypt is more corrupt than they ever imagined. And the king, he was so disgraceful and tyrannical that he actually used the entire state apparatus for his own personal gain and for his own personal transgressions. What do I mean by that? He was an avid womanizer, okay? The king of Egypt, and he employed spies throughout the lands, throughout his kingdom. And do you know what their job was? Right? Nowadays you have Instagram, you don't need this, right? So what were the job of the spies? All they would, exactly, can you believe this? He had state spies that would just be on the lookout for beautiful women. They had no other job and no other task but to report back that today I found so and so and she's very beautiful. And if there's a beautiful woman, the king decreed that she would have to come to him whether she wanted it or not, and regardless of whether she's married or not. Okay, so now Ibrahim and Sarah are there. We have a major problem. This is a big problem. They know this, nothing has happened yet, but they know this is going to be a problem. How do they know this is going to be a problem? By the way, this is not affecting everybody in Egypt, right? But as soon as they enter, Ibrahim and Sarah know this is a problem. Anybody know why? This is mentioned in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a more advanced and subtle point. You see, Sarah is the second most beautiful woman that ever existed. Okay? And it's mentioned in the hadith that there wasn't a single woman before her since the time of Hawa that was more beautiful than her. So, Ibrahim, he knows who he's married to, right? So he's like, oh no, we gotta, right? So he realizes, like, this is gonna be a problem. So Imam al-Hakim, he recorded the hadith from the authority of Anas ibn Malik, radiallahu anh, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, and this is a more authentic hadith, that Yusuf, and by the way, I've mentioned before, that for the purpose of Sunday, I use a lot of weak hadith and I use a lot of reports from the Israeliyat. Everybody knows that, right? And in Jum'ah khutbah, if you hear hadith from me, it's gonna be a good hadith. That's my style. Because it's Friday, so I don't give you the weak hadith. And then in Wednesday, I'll tell you the authenticity, right? Why do I do this? Because on Sunday, what are we studying? We're studying history. We're studying the stories of the Anbiya. So the standard, the requirement for the hadith will be lower. If we're studying fiqh, if we're studying aqeedah and belief, no. We need something which is very authentic. We're only gonna build our religion on something which is verified. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Yusuf and his mother, alayhim assalam, have been granted half of all beauty. Right? There's another version of the hadith that Yusuf has been given half of the beauty, but a lot of people miss that and his mother. So Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah, he mentioned the and his mother, that actually it's not referring to his mother, but rather his grandmother. So remember, it's Yusuf, and then you have Yaqub, Ishaq, and then you have Sarah, right? So actually, I said grandmother, great grandmother. It's a reference to Sarah. This hadith has been declared as authentic by Imam al-Hakim and also by Imam al-Dhahabi. These are from the second Tabi' al-Tabi'in. So when they arrive, they hear about this king, and an outsider just came in. They know that he has the most beautiful woman that's ever existed. And so the king finds out about this, and he says, bring her to me and ask that man who's with her who he is. If he is her husband, then you're commanded to kill him. But if he's her brother or anything else, then let him live, it's fine. In Genesis, I'm reading from the chapter of Genesis. I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Now it's understood that Jibreel alayhi salam sent this information to Ibrahim, so that way he knew what to do. Otherwise, how would he know? Ibrahim told her that by Allah, and now I'm switching to the Islamic sources. So in the Islamic sources, it's mentioned that Ibrahim told her that by Allah, in the whole world, it's only me and you, and of course Lut, who say La ilaha illallah. So between you, Sarah, and me, we are brothers in Islam. Everybody with me? So there's a brotherhood and fraternity in faith. So the Jewish interpretation is that they were half siblings, so it's not a lie, and it's also to defend life. For us, it was based on his intention, right? So that his intention was that we are brothers in faith, and they kept praying to Allah. Then they took Sarah to the king. The king was shocked when he saw her, because he couldn't believe and imagine how beautiful she was. They started to prepare her in the room, and here she is, she's praying, she's making dua, and she's very, very sad. And besides her beauty, she's known because she's very humble, very modest, very chaste woman. She seeks refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's mentioned in Jewish text and the Muslim text, this is in both, that she does tawassul by her chastity. She does tawassul by her modesty and by her good deeds and by her fidelity. So what does that mean, tawassul? When I say tawassul, what does it mean? That means tawassul is that you are seeking something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in this case you're using tawassul by your actions. So this is, you're using your actions as a means of attaining. So, oh Allah, I save myself for you. So, oh Allah, deliver me from this predicament. Save me, right? By this situation, by virtue of that. Now, I've mentioned before, because we get the question about tawassul and istighatha a lot, so I said, okay, we'll talk about it, why not? So, as you know, tawassul by actions or by people is permissible, according to the vast majority of the ulama. There are very, very few scholars that have said that you cannot. So for example, if somebody makes dua and say, oh Allah, I seek the means through my standing in prayer in tahajjud, that, oh Allah, protect my children. So this is, what kind of dua is this? This is called tawassul. But this is tawassul, is it through a person or through actions? This is through a'mal, through deeds, right? You can also make dua that, oh Allah, I ask you to protect my children bijahin nabi, right? Atawassal, that I seek through the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or even you can mention any person, whether the person is alive or the person is dead. You can mention it. Why is this permissible? And you know, you've heard me before that I am very critical of istighatha, about asking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You guys know that because I've mentioned it so many times, that I think that, and a lot of scholars, they said it's okay, but I'm very hesitant because this was not practiced by the early generations, the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. It was not their practice. Even the very pious people that we know, they only asked from Allah. So even if it is permissible as a matter of belief, it's something that we should really, in my view, it is something that we should avoid. But tawassul is different. If I say, oh Allah, by the honor and the position of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, protect my children, why is this not problematic at all? Why is this widely permissible? Because you're asking Allah, and are you asking, when you say through the Prophet ﷺ, is the Prophet ﷺ involved in this in any way? No, when you say bijahin Nabi, it means that by the position and the honor of the Prophet ﷺ. So whether the person is alive or dead, it has nothing to do with it. It's not related to the request at all. The request is, it's if you have a line, so it's A and B, is between you and Allah. So when you mention something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that person is not granting it to you, right? So this is why the vast majority, very, very few scholars, they disagreed and they said not to do tawassul, but the vast majority of the fuqaha, they said it is permissible, and it's reported that Sarah, she did dua with tawassul, right? And she was known to be a very devout worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see that Allah accepted her dua later on, and actually we mentioned it in the last rak'ah, in the very final two verses. How did Allah, of course you know He gifted Ismail, but Allah also gifted Sarah and Ibrahim a son. And can you believe that she was very close to 100 years of age and she delivered that baby? In fact, when the angels, it's not this topic today, but when the angels came to deliver the story, it's mentioned in the Qur'an. What was her response when the angels told her the news? How is it possible? She started laughing. She was like, that can't be. There's no way. Like, you know, that ship has sailed, right? I mean, she had moved on and thought about other things in life. And of course, she was sad about not having a baby, but she's like, there's no way that that's possible. It's also mentioned that she was very dutiful to her husband. In the Bible, it mentions that she never disobeyed her husband. And so this is one of the reasons, hopefully I don't get in trouble for mentioning that, but that's mentioned in the book of Genesis as one of the reasons for God's grace. And we should be able to talk openly about this, that the Prophet ﷺ, in numerous authentic hadith, he said, I guarantee Jannah for the woman whose husband is pleased with her. Right? So he didn't say it once or twice. The Messenger ﷺ, maybe because husbands are so difficult to please, right? But he said it so many times, so it's got to mean something. And some people, they get offended by that, but I think you're thinking the wrong way. I mean, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has opened a door of Jannah for you, why are you going to be upset? Like, you got an extra door. Like, you don't have to take that door. Take a different door of Jannah. But you have a door that's available to you, right? Which is that by being dutifully, like being a dutiful wife is a clear way of entering Jannah. So, look at it in a positive way. And she's the mother of a whole line, a whole lineage of prophethood. Okay, now the story comes full circle. The king, he walks in, he's very excited, but he sees that she's very sad. He closes the door, and when he sees that she's very sad, so this is kind of I mean, of course, people didn't want that, but normally when people get overwhelmed because they're in the palace, there's gold, there's silver, there's brocade, there's pearls, and she is not captivated by any of that. She could care less. None of that means anything to her. And he sees that she's very sad. And even this tyrannical king, when he sees her, he wants her so desperately, he is actually affected by her sadness. And he sits down and he's looking, not enough to let her free, right? But he sits down next to her and talks to her. He starts offering her things and jewelry, but she's not interested in any of that. And while he's sitting with her, what ends up happening? He gets drowsy and he falls asleep. This is all part of Allah's plan. In that sleep, he sees a dream. It's a very serious dream, right? A vision from Allah that he had to release her or he would see the destruction of himself and his whole people. This is described in Genesis chapter 20, verses 1 until 7. I'll quote it. God declared that taking her would result in death because she was a married woman. Abimelech, that's the name of the king that's mentioned in the Bible, his name is not mentioned in the Qur'an, who had not laid hands on her, inquired if he would also slay a righteous nation. Especially since Abraham had claimed that he and Sarah were siblings. Actually, this is not the verbatim, right? And then God tells the king that actually Ibrahim had a blameless heart. Now this is very interesting because what does the Qur'an say about Ibrahim in a different context? He said, "Inni dhahibun ila Rabbi sayahdin idh ja'a rabbahu biqalbin salim." So Allah also says in a different context that he came to Allah with a blameless heart, right? And that he was continuing to see how there's a lot overlap between the Quran and the Bible. Of course, in the Bible there's a lot of other stuff mixed in as well. However, if he doesn't return Sarah to Ibrahim, Allah will definitely destroy the king and the entire household. And Ibrahim, believe it or not, he says to the king, this is according to the Jewish, it's not mentioned in the Islamic text, he says, "Don't worry, I'm going to pray for your people." Because the people in the house in the royal family, actually, they did not deliver any children since this incident. So then they were all frantic that what's happening, we're cursed. And then Ibrahim said, "No, I'll pray for you." So he actually prayed on their behalf. Okay. So the king, after he wakes up, he sees what happened and he's terrified, right? And he takes it really seriously. And in fact, he showers her with gifts and apologizes and gives her one very important gift. What's the gift? The gift is the gift of Hajar, right? And next time, inshallah, we'll talk about who Hajar is. Because a lot of Muslims are affected by the Jewish texts that say she's a concubine and that she was a slave. She was gifted to them, but she was not gifted as a slave, right? So just so there's no misunderstanding. But now they leave that you can go, and then Hajar and Ibrahim live together as husband and wife. And this is through the encouragement of Sarah because she was not able to bear children. And so that was something that she also wanted. And they all lived peacefully in Egypt for a very long time. They had a lot of blessings. They had a lot of wealth in their business, lots of sheep. That's how, that's very important in those times. And what ended up happening is they did so well in Egypt, people got jealous. Right? Because they heard the story, they saw how they were affluent, and he took everything and he took his family to the Jerusalem area, to Palestine with both wives. And here he is in Jerusalem, not in the city of Jerusalem, but in the area of Jerusalem, right? And he's closer to the area of Khalil. Khalil in English, you guys know as Hebron, right? Has anybody visited Khalil? Yes. This is a very, very important site. We'll talk about it in a moment. Ibn Kathir, he mentions that there are records from Ahlul Kitab, and I investigated also, it's mentioned in the Hebrew Bible itself, that Sayyidatuna Sarah lived for 127 years. Exactly, that's what's mentioned in the Bible. She lived for 127, which is consistent with the Muslim version. It's not mentioned in the Islamic text, but it's consistent. And that she died in Asham. And some of the ulama, they specified that she died in Hebron. I believe this to be correct because the passing of Ibrahim and Sarah was a widely observed historical event. People knew the exact location. So remember, I was talking about when you go to Jordan, they say, "Oh, this is where Shu'aib is, and this is where Ayub is." And some of it I'm a little bit skeptical of. But I think in the case of Hebron, it's probably exactly accurate or very close to accurate. because there's what they call, the Jewish people call the cave of the patriarchs, right? We call it the sanctuary of Ibrahim. And this is a compound in Al Khalil, in Hebron. You guys have seen it with the barbed wire and the narrow walkway, right? This is how the Palestinians live there. But they have a time for Muslims and they have another side in which Jewish people are able to go. It's very, very complicated. There's been a lot of violence over the years in Khalil, but this is a place which is very special for Muslims, for Jews, and for Christians. And in all of the history, by the way, in all of the Islamic history, Jewish people were allowed to visit this place. They were able to observe their faith even after the Crusades. What were the only time periods when Jews were not able to enter Hebron and Jerusalem? This is a historical fact, undisputed. When were Jews not allowed? When Christians ruled it. This is a very simple answer. It's not only the first crusade. Actually, the second crusade is the long one, right? Which is the longest one? It's like 80 something years. It's not the first one. It's probably the third. No. I think it's the second one. It's the second one. It's the second one. So the longest period, right? Because that's like 2 generations. So the only times in which Jewish people are not allowed is when Christians ruled, right? So this is very important because people talk about anti-Semitism in the Middle East and as if there's a lot of animosity between Muslims and Christians. This is categorically false, right? The Muslims are the ones who cleaned up the Temple Mount. The Muslims are the ones who opened up and built up Masjid al-Aqsa and Qubbat al-Sakhra and that whole area. The reason for that wall being preserved is because of Muslims. This cannot be disputed by anyone. It is 100% a historical fact. And the only time periods when they were completely banned under the Romans and by the Crusaders, right? And so the period of coexistence has always been under the Muslim rule, in which people from all 3 faiths would visit Ibrahim and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca, and Jacob and Leah. Another side point, by the way, these are Muslim names, by the way. If somebody wants to name their kid Rebecca, so Muslims will be like, oh my God, right? But it's a Muslim name. Why not? I wouldn't myself. There are other reasons, right? But a Muslim name is a name with a good meaning, right? So these are prophets and prophets' wives and mothers. So these are good names if somebody wants to choose them. The last thing for us to talk about is the topic that we started to discuss, which is about telling lies. The Prophet ﷺ said that Ibrahim did not lie except on 3 occasions. 2 for the sake of Allah, when he said that, no, this is the biggest one. And then when he said, Inni saqim, when he said that I'm sick. And one time when he was traveling in the land of the tyrants and Sarah was with him. So why is it that we do not consider them lies? In the Jewish text, they consider them to be lies that Ibrahim justifies. But we don't consider them as condemnable lies. The first one is an excuse, right? The second is a form of preaching, right? Because he's like, the idol did it. Like, the listener knows the idol didn't do it. So he's not lying because he's not giving them a factual report, right? He's telling them that so they can themselves be like, no, that's not possible. And then in the third case, he intended the truth, but they're the ones that got confused, right? And also the first 2 are for the sake of Allah, and the last one is for the preservation of life, hifz al-hayat, right? Which are from the maqasid al-sharia. These are from the higher objectives of the Sharia, and we have a lot of rules, ad-darurat, tabih al-mahdhurat, that when there's a necessity, things that are normally not allowed, they become permissible. إِذَا ضَاعَ الْأَمْرِ اتَّسِعْ, when things become constricted, then the rule becomes loosened. When there's a case of darar, when there's a case of bodily harm, these are all different qawaid fiqhiyah, right? So then it becomes permissible. Another way of analyzing this is that these are all tawriyah, meaning that these are not lies, but these are equivocations. So somebody's like, oh, well, where are you from? Well, I'm from the earth. So it's like, yeah, you're like, oh, I'm from water. So it's like, I don't really want to answer your question, right? So it's like, I'm not trying to deceive you or to lie to you, but I'm just answering the question in a different way. According to Ibn Hajar, he reports from Ibn Aqil. He says, reason prohibits us from attribute lying to Ibrahim. It is decided by the mind that a messenger must be trustworthy, has to be reliable in order to give people trust that what they convey from Allah the Almighty is sound. If a Nabi, if a prophet lies, how can you take revelation from them? It's inconceivable that we follow a prophet who lies. Of course, it can be possible, then where would the lie come from? So here he says, Ibn Hajar, he said, ascribing lying to him is for what he took the form of lying from the perspective of the listener. We go back to the bottle, right? So from the perspective of Ibrahim, it's the truth, but the listener is hearing something different from what the speech he's intending. So Ibrahim would not call it lying except in the case of severe terror on the Day of Judgment because of his high rank, right? So explicit lying in these situations is permissible. And then he says, it might even be obligatory. Why? Because it is akhafud dararain. It is the lesser of the two evils in order to eliminate the greater of them. By the way, I want to caution you, even though Ibn Hajar Asqalani is mentioning Ibn Aqil, we don't have something in Sharia called akhafud dararain. Okay? In the Muslim streets, people are like, oh, it's the lesser of two evils. We have no rule in Sharia that you can do something because it's the lesser of two evils. We have a concept. Even people, have you heard the word darura? That it is necessary? When somebody says it's darura, 9 times out of 10, the person is ignorant. Sorry, I know this is a little strong. We have the word called darar. That is the word in Sharia. That when there's a harm, right? La darara wa la dirar. This is one of the most important concepts in Sharia, that there should not be harm. Because if you use the standard of necessity, that, oh, it's necessary, then who's deciding what's necessary? Every Tom, Dick, or Harry is going to have a different story. Well, I really need an 8-bedroom house, right? So it becomes like darura, becomes necessity. So it's too subjective, so we don't do that. But we don't have anything called a white lie in Islam. A lot of Muslims, they took from this story, they said, I have read Islamic books that say that Ibrahim told a white lie. Is that correct? That is categorically false. There's a lot of what we've been taught about our religion which is wrong. Okay? Lying is a form of treachery. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْكَذِبِ. Beware of lying, because it is akdhabul hadith. It is the worst of all speech, and it leads to wickedness and evil doing, and wickedness leads to yahdi ila nar. It leads to the hellfire. But there are exceptions. War as a strategy makes lying permissible. Speech between husband and wife that will lead to good company makes it permissible. Speech that causes people to settle issues also makes it permissible. So in the Q&A, we can also discuss this further. So for example, speech between the husband and wife. Sometimes people are going through difficult times, right? People in their relationships, they go through a good patch, they go through periods of turmoil, disagreements, conflict, distance, whatever, right? Wife asks the husband, do you love me? Let's say he's not feeling it right now. There is only one correct answer to that question. Brothers and sisters, what is the correct answer? Yes, I love you dearly. There is no other answer to that question. Can you imagine the amount of harm that will come? This is not a lie. If he's not feeling it, that's something different. We don't consider this as a lie. This is by consensus among the fuqaha. It's not just Brother Refai said it, right? The words between a husband and a wife to facilitate and to bring their hearts closer, it's not considered a lie at all. It doesn't even fall within the definition. Also, when people have issues, when you say, oh, you know, he was saying good things about you, that is permissible, but I would recommend keep it general, right? And then there's the complete exemption when there's a necessity, when there's duress, when you're trying to prevent harm. And very often I see Muslims Have you seen this where people are like, oh, it's okay to lie because they're not Muslim? Because we live in America. Have you seen Muslims that lie and cheat and they're like, oh, but it's non-Muslims? You've been around good Muslims. You don't know people that do that. This is a big trend. People are saying, but they're non-Muslims, so I can lie to them. This is absolutely crazy. You lying is between you and Allah. It has nothing to do with who you're lying to. Whether the person is, they could be Hindu or Buddhist, or it makes no difference. You owe them truth, right? As Abu Bakr said, "As-sidqu amana wal kadhibu khiyana." Honesty is a trust, and lying is a form of treachery. So what do? We get the question, how does my outfit look? Does it make me look fat? Do you like my food? Right? What color do you prefer? People, they call in sick from their job. Say, oh, because they need to use a sick day. How do you manage these life situations? I'm not going to talk about the heavy things of, faking reports in work. That's obviously wrong, right? But I'm going to talk about the gray areas, right? Find a way to navigate these situations in which you convey a meaning that does not misrepresent the facts. If you don't take anything from today's lesson, take that. Don't misrepresent the facts. Otherwise, in tawriyah, you can present it and no, it looks great. That would be a permissible kind of equivocation. Tawriyah, right? Because you're like, oh, it looks good, you haven't lied, but at the same time, you haven't hurt the person's feelings. So this is the best way that the fuqaha, they said you should navigate these type of situations with wisdom and with knowledge. Barakallahu feekum. We touched on so many important, essential topics, ethical issues, beliefs. So really, you can ask almost anything. Bismillah. Who'd like to begin? Yes. Sure. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so the question or the comment is about in matters of a matter of life and death, that it's excused. This one people never have a problem with, because I think intuitively we know, that if you're dying and you can only eat pork, everybody's like, okay, well that's simple, But it's like, oh, the restaurant didn't have anything but bacon. So okay, well you could just leave the restaurant. I get so many questions from people all the time. They're like, oh, I work in this place and there's no place for me to pray. Do I have to pray? I was like, do you have feet? Just go outside. And they're like, oh, okay. No, that's not, if you can leave, then that's not a problem. Like if you're in a restaurant and all they have is bacon, like just leave. Like that is not a necessity. But if you're actually in a case of life and death, then not only would it be permissible, but it would even be obligatory. It would be mandatory for you to lie in order to protect life. So let's say, for example, if you're in a place in which Muslims are persecuted and somebody says, are you Muslim? What should you say? You should say no. We know this. The Prophet ﷺ himself told Sahaba, and there were some Sahaba who said that, no, Ya Rasulullah, I don't want to hide my faith. But the Prophet ﷺ gave exemptions to people to hide their faith.
So there's another concept nowadays, pretentious. You pretend, and compared to lie, you pretend, kind of.
You pretend to lie?
Pretend, yeah, you pretend, say, oh, I don't feel good. Even though you do not have any problem, but you're pretending that other people will feel that, oh, you are not feeling good.
Okay.
The pretentiousness.
This is subjective. This might be okay. I'll tell you why. Let's say you have something going on with the family, you don't want to go into work, right? Instead of saying that, oh, I'm so sick, and making a fake cough on the phone, please don't do that, okay? This is not the way of the believer. But you know, we have more awareness now. People have personal days, they have mental health days, right? So you're able to call and you say, you know, I'm not feeling very good. So your intention is, I'm not feeling really good about missing my son's birthday party, right? So you're not feeling good. But if somebody's like, oh, do you have a fever? No, don't make up a fake fever, because that is in which you are misrepresenting facts, in which you're lying. So find a way to navigate in between. But like when he says, Inni saqim, I'm not feeling well, like Ibrahim said. So this is a kind of equivocation, which I think will be permissible. But be careful. Yeah. You know, people lie so much unnecessarily.
Yeah, yeah, but that's we have to be very careful not to,
Yes.
because we give people like, it's like giving them ideas how you can lie. It
No,
becomes
no,
dangerous.
please, brother, don't take notes on how to lie from ICCP,
Yeah.
okay?
So it's like lying cannot be something we can accept. It's
Right. And you don't want to get good at lying, because then you get used to it. Yeah. But there are others who lie a lot better than us, right? Let them specialize.
no, but it is really a widespread problem in our community.
Oh yes, it's so
I mean,
normalized.
this white lie. I mean, I give always this example, and it's very dangerous. Like somebody comes home, he takes a good nap. He's I don't know, and then he wakes up, and like a friend comes suddenly, and he cannot leave the house. And then the other friend calls him up. He says, "Hey, I've been waiting with you." He says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I just came home." He's like lying in front of all his kids, his family, and everything, because he made a mistake, and instead of being honest about and say, sorry, I forgot. No, he comes up with just anything to justify a mistake.
Sure, but I also want people to be aware. So it's one thing to say I just came home. It's a higher level. Remember that old song in Egypt in which the kid tells dad on the phone, who you know, the guy calls and he's like, oh, you know, he tells his dad, and his dad tells him, tell him that I'm not home. And then in the song he tells the guy, dad says that he's not home. Right? This is from the 90s, right? I lived in Egypt a long time ago. So so it's another thing when you teach your kids to make up something like, I'm not home and you're in the house. So that is a whole different level. So like when somebody says I'm 5 minutes away and they're 10 minutes away, this is bad. But when somebody mentions a place that they're not at, this is a whole different level of lying.
But people are practicing that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really dangerous.
Yeah, I agree. There's a question here. What about the Suhuf of Ibrahim? The scrolls, the writing of Ibrahim, have they survived to today? No, they don't exist, but we know about their existence from the Qur'an and from the Hadith. Also, how about lying to make amends between people? Is this permissible? This is agreed, and we have the sources in the Hadith that it is permissible to make amends between people. Some people have exaggerated it to make like very outlandish, detailed accounts. Keep it very general, right? So when you're trying to make amends, then it is permissible for you to say that so-and-so was praising you, or so-and-so was missing you, to try to bring them closer. But as Brother Nabil mentioned, you know, we should be very, very cautious about honesty. And my recommendation would be to keep it very general. Is there hadith that tells a Muslim can commit a grave sin, then repents genuinely but cannot lie? Okay, I remember Sahabi came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked, can a Muslim be a thief but cannot be a liar? Okay, this hadith has been challenged by some on its authenticity, but I think the hadith is okay. This is not the problem. I think people misunderstood the hadith, right? Why is it that the Prophet ﷺ is that he cannot be a believer who's a liar? The reason is that you can lie and be a believer, but you cannot be a liar and be a believer. So there's a linguistic problem here. When people read the translation, they're like, how is it possible a murderer can be a believer and a liar can be a believer? Meaning that when a person's speech is all lies, that is inconsistent with faith, because faith is about being honest with Allah. And so it's another thing that you can lie and you can repent. But if your state, if the predominant characteristic of you is lying, that is inconsistent with Iman in a way that even some major sins are not. Why? Because that major sin is a moment. So you steal, and he's not a believer the moment that he steals. No, the person is a believer. They misunderstood the hadith. But in that moment, they're disregarding their Iman in order to disobey Allah and to commit that crime. So when we say, oh, the person is not a believer when he steals, what does that mean? It means that the faith is present, but they're disregarding that faith. But if you're always lying, that means you're always disregarding your faith. That means you actually don't have the faith in the first place. And that's why lying is being a liar is inconsistent with being a believer. I think, Chavez, any of the sisters? Yeah, oh, go ahead.
You spent a good amount of time talking about certainty today, and you briefly touched on sincerity. Can you expand on the signs of sincerity for a believer?
I mean, the biggest sign of sincerity is that when your actions in private are equal to or better than your actions in public. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm the worst offender in this respect. Because our religion, for me and Anas and Dr. Tariq, our religious life is like open for all of you guys. So it's very, very hard. It puts a lot of pressure on us that we have to like be as good or even good in our private lives, which can be very difficult. And many of us, we fall short. Definitely I fall short to that standard. But I still want to answer your question, even though I'm a hypocrite. So that way you can have a good answer. A good litmus test is that when you find the same joy, like for example, we prayed Fajr together. We recited, I think, 2.5 pages, 2 pages in Fajr. But did you guys feel that it was long? I'm guessing you didn't feel that it was long because you enjoy hearing from the Qur'an. But then when you pray Fajr on your own, are you doing like Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Salam, Salam, and then like go back to the bed before you, like while you're still sleepy, right? So we've all done it, right? Because sometimes we're busy. But are there times when you're in private when you have that same enjoyment in the salah that you have publicly? Do you give, so if you give charity publicly, do you also give charity privately? So the strongest test of sincerity is, are you doing things privately to an even better extent? The other test of sincerity is the absence of other motivators. So if you can remove arrogance, if you can remove pride, if you can remove love of leadership, love of fame, right? Hubbul ri'asa, hubbul shuhra, these are the diseases of the heart, right? Hubbul mal. If you can remove all of these diseases of the heart, then what are you going to be left with? Then you'll be left with sincerity towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the first one is a reality check, because a lot of us do things for people. And it's mixed. It's for Allah's sake, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands and requires that it should be 100% for Him. And it should not even be 1% for anybody else. There's another sister, and then
I was wondering, you had talked about how logic is one of the ways to faith.
Yes.
What are the other ways?
So the viewpoint that I follow, this is in the Ash'ari and Maturidi schools of Aqeedah. This is the majority view in Islam, is that there are 3 sources of faith, which is revelation, and this is the main one, right? Because if Allah tells us about Himself, we're going to run with that, right? Revelation. The other one is reason, because this is our fitrah. There were some Muslims, by the way, in early Islam, who said that we can, by the way, this is also, believe it or not, Ibn Taymiyyah believes this also. Today it's very hard because Salafis today don't believe that, right? But Ibn Taymiyyah, he believes that you can be from the people of fitrah, that you can have Iman just on your own and you can figure it out on your own. And that has been rejected by the Ummah. No one follows that opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah. And I think it's wrong, right? But I'm mentioning it because it's Ibn Taymiyyah. He's one of the greatest scholars in Islamic history. And then the third one is observation through the signs. فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Right? So when you look in the signs, Allah سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقِّ. So this ayah is a very strong evidence that Allah has placed signposts. It's the best way to translate. When we say ayat here, it doesn't just mean signs, it means signposts. These are signs with an arrow that go this way, turn left, go right. This is from Allah. وَمِنَ الْجِبَالِ جُدَدٌ بِيضٌ وَحُمْرٌ مُخْتَلِفٌ أَلْوَانُهَا وَغَرَابِيبُ سُودٌ. Allah has created diversity and beauty. When you see the plates, when you see a volcano, when you see the earth, and you understand how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made His creation. When you go in the depths of the ocean and you look at the reefs, when you look at the plankton, when you look at the ecosystems, all of that is showing intelligent design. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, do they think خَلَقَنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا? Do you think that they were just created randomly? وَأَنَّكُمْ إِلَيْنَا لَا تُرْجَعُونَ, and they're not coming back to us? No. الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا. Those who do dhikr, remember Allah standing, وَقُعُودًا, and while sitting, وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ, and while they're on their sides, meaning while they're sleeping and while they're lying down. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ, and they are reflecting, pondering, فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, in the creation of the heavens and the earth. مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. One of the most beautiful verses in the Qur'an. And they say, oh Allah. So that means when you read this ayah, you feel the element of time. You can't read this ayah quickly. You have ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك. Because you think of a person who's reflecting and thinking. He says, there's no way that you created this in vain. So you are transcendent, so save us from the hellfire. So this is also a source of iman. When you go out into nature, it should increase you in faith. But the primary source is revelation. And this is the blessing and the gift of being from the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi ala ni'matil Islam wa kafa bina ni'ma. This is a sufficient ni'mah for us. Okay, Chavez, finally, I'm sorry. Samihni. Alaikum salam.
So just to clarify, in all of our Islamic sources, the ruler of Egypt is referred to as the Malik, right? Okay, so in Genesis, it's interesting because the ruler is referred to as Pharaoh. It's referred to as Pharaoh. It's the same with Yusuf alayhi salam. The ruler is referred to as Malik, but then you go later to Musa, it's referred to as Pharaoh. And it's very interesting because modern historians now actually criticize the Bible for this aspect, saying, why is the ruler of Egypt, for Ibrahim, referred to as Pharaoh when that wasn't until later? But the Quran, but this is like this, I'm just mentioning it because it's very, very precise and particular wording that most people probably just read it like, oh, same thing. I never thought about it.
Jazakallah khair. MashaAllah, we learn from each other so much. I don't know anything about it. But it shows how there is not even one contradiction or one error within the Quran. So it's even historically accurate. Yes. Can you give?
Jazakallah khair. It's just I want to follow on the Imam when you mention revelation and then you go to the observations.
To reason and then observation. Yeah?
And I'm wondering whether this vary from one individual to the other. For example, revelation could be more relevant to the Prophet ﷺ compared to us versus the observation like what we see now through the technology. We could observe things which did not probably long time ago. People would not observe it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving us sign over time, which might be in a previous. If you could comment.
This is an excellent question, very important question. But I think respectfully, I disagree. I'll tell you why though. I think that the Prophet ﷺ is less reliant on revelation. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ is the only one, since his time until now, whose heart is 100% pure. His heart was cleaned. Some people, they said 3, some people said 4, some people said up to 7. I believe 4 times that the Prophet ﷺ's heart was cleansed and purified for the revelation, and he never intuitively, from the fitrah, he never worshipped other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because of that, even without receiving the Qur'an and the revelation, the Prophet ﷺ was already on the right path. Whereas us, we are more subject to our whims. And so because of that, we are more dependent on the revelation than even the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
I did not really mean it in that. Thank you for clarifying that. But my point about the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed the Prophet, for example, in terms of there is war, something will open to him. And I meant it in that sense. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to him through Jibreel or through vision, like he will be the winner, for example, or what would happen to Kisra, what would happen. So I meant it in that aspect. I did not mean it.
That he's receiving information outside of the wahi. Outside, when I say outside of the wahi, I mean outside of the Qur'an, to be more precise. So outside of the Qur'an, he's also receiving information. That's true, and none of us, we have, other than dreams, we have no access to, Allah is not talking to any of us. Let's be very clear, right? Directly, right? But Allah is talking to us indirectly through the nafahat rabbaniyah, meaning that through the events that are unfolding in our lives, Allah is talking to us, every single one of us. And in some cases, He might speak to us through the dreams. That's also possible.
Right, and the last point, it's about the observation, like right now, what we see through the technology. For example, you could see views about seas, about mountain, I would imagine people in the old days would not have that opportunity, so you could see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the wonders of His creation, and that things cannot be at random in a way.
I'm always amazed. Actually, you guys know I was on vacation for a week, and I'm one of those crazy people. We went on a submarine. I know everybody's like, you went on a submarine after what happened in the news. Don't you read the news? You know what happened the last time, So we went on a submarine to see the reefs in the Caribbean, and it's just unbelievable seeing the ecosystem there and seeing all the coral and the fish and the sharks and how everything is in balance, and just the beauty and the colors and the designs. There's a whole world under the sea that we are not even privy to. So I couldn't help when I was looking at that just to reflect on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the beauty of His creation, just independent from all of the proof and the evidence, just the beauty. Inna Allaha jamilun yuhibbul jamal. Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. So sometimes you see وَيُسَبِّحُ الرَّعْدُ بِحَمْدِ, that Allah causes the thunder and the lightning to do tasbih with His praise. So you feel His jalal. But then Allah is also beauty. And sometimes you see things in the creation, you feel His jamal. So this is also a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. Jazakallahu khairan. May Allah increase us in knowledge, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala show us beauty that brings us closer to Him. Subhanakallah bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.